So Cliff,
Yes.
I feel like you wrote a piece for the Daily Beast called "How the Gun Nuts Try to Excuse the Santa Barbara Slaughter and Why They're Wrong," and there was something that struck me in reading this column and in thinking about this latest gun catastrophe and the
Yeah.
reality that there is, as you say, there's a domestic arms industry and the politicians that are beholden to them that feel absolutely comfortable uh, with the body count just kind of increasing exponentially and not doing anything about it. And for all of the cultural and historical pseudo nonsense explanations, there's a fundamental profit motive behind what's going on here. And I want to
Yeah.
run down what you did in this article because I think even if we're talking to audiences of people who are probably fairly convinced on the gun issue, these are the myths that this industry has us living by, right? Like literally, these are myths that we're living and dying by. If we're going to ban
Well,
guns, let's ban knives. Let's ban
right.
cars. Take us
So, well, I mean,
through
they've
these arguments, explain why they're nonsense, and re-anchor us in what is actually driving these insane gun policies that we're living and dying under.
so yeah. I mean, they basically have spent 40 years now, kind of repeating the same catch phrases, the same slogans, offering up the same BS. They learned from what numerous other right group. Well, let's not call them right wing groups, but groups that became right wing groups learned along the way who wanted to make a profit. I mean, the best example, of course, is the tobacco industry,
Right.
who if you could sort of, as they called it, manufacture doubt in people, if you could create your own fake studies, if you could give people so people could rely on those, if you could give people talking points that have no real basis in reality but get them out there, either academics who you corrupt, people in the media, everyday people in the grassroots, and that obviously has become much more important in the age of social media than it even was back then you can extend the window while your product, which everybody who is relying upon sound science knows is simply killing people, you can extend that window for perhaps decades. I mean, they knew that tobacco was addictive and it was causing cancer in the 50s and 60s. Think about how long it took us to really do anything about it. And the NRA certainly learned from that. I mean, you see it now with what's going on in global warming. The oil companies, if they can make that a partisan issue, one where there's a he said and a she said. I don't know if you saw the bit that John Oliver did on it the other night.
I did. That was
Which
great.
was fantastic because that you don't ever get that. I mean, he did what it always should be. Generally what you get is one person arguing with one other person. Instead, he said, well, 97% of scientists accept this. That this is reality, so why don't we have 97 people in the room argue against 3 people? Because that would be a more accurate showing. And on the gun issue, it's the same thing. I mean, if it's background checks, you should get 90 people in a room arguing against 10. I mean, if you just want people. If you want to get the scientific studies, it would probably be about the same as the ones on global warming. And so they've created this situation where they act like there's equal weight to people who've been proven to be frauds. I wrote 2 pieces actually, and that second one that you're referring to was kind of a response to my first one, because my first one was just on how the NRA enables these kinds of massacres. And I got the usual responses from the Breitbart flying monkeys, who are always fun to deal with. They kind of make me laugh, and others on the right who tried to denounce the piece and question it, and say that it was a lie and this and that. And so I decided, with all the responses they came at me with, this would be a good primer for people to see that this stuff's crap. That they come at you with the same.
That's even exactly after I wrote these. So, Cliff, this is exactly right, and I think that that's so important. That anytime you're talking guns or you're talking global warming, you have to go back to the tobacco industry, the corruption of science, and how objective public health and science issues turn into PR issues at the behest of venile industries. Absolutely. So
right,
what
they
you
turn
did,
it into an actually identifying issue culturally for those on the right. So it's no longer just a belief; it's a belief system that you're questioning.
Right, and a cultural and a brand. I don't believe in climate. I don't believe in public safety with guns, and I listen to a certain type of music and buy a certain type of beer. It's a consumer preference and a cultural story. Let's run through the 3. So let's lay it out. if you're going to ban guns, you need to ban cars and knives, because they can also be used to kill people. And indeed, this despicable kid in Santa Barbara did in fact use knives and cars to harm people. Let's run through that. The other myth is, well, California has supposedly tough gun laws. So doesn't that show you that tough gun laws don't work? All of these myths that, again, myths that we live and die by, and if they're not kind of exposed and aggressively called out, their frames are going to settle in, and they're going to cloud the water. So explain why those arguments are ludicrous. Break them down.
Right, and so let me make sure also I took on 3 arguments. One of them was a very general one. I went into the whole thing about, well, people kill people, and that's one they use, all the time. Guns don't kill people, people do. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to make sure people
So let's
understand.
not give people frigging assault weapons. But anyways, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, so the first one you brought up was knives and automobiles, and the reason that's an important one because that's specific to this case, because he used a knife and he used an automobile. But you'll often hear when you get in a more general argument, people say, well, why don't we just ban hammers? They kill people. Why don't we just – so this is really for any other tool out there, for anything else that kills people, whether accidentally or here and there. First of all, so here's the key thing. Going into knives, clearly a knife – like an automobile, like a hammer, like these other objects, have other purposes than to kill. They do other things. They do not solely exist to kill. But beyond that, with a knife, it's almost sort of a common sense thing. Clearly, as I put there in the piece, you don't hear about drive-by knifings. Okay, we didn't storm Omaha Beach by throwing knives. Guns can more accurately kill. They can kill from further away. They can kill in a much more impersonal way, so you don't have to look into people's eyes when you do it. It's a dot, that you're looking at through your scope or who you're running by quickly in your car. It's so obviously a lot more people with a lot more accuracy, a lot more dangerous. The numbers don't even come close to matching up in terms of now you're not talking about 80-something, 1,000 people who are dying per year. So so nothing comparable between guns and knives. With automobiles, it's clearly even a more interesting one because these people walk right into something they don't even get, which is automobiles did used to kill a lot more people. There used to be a lot more traffic fatalities, a lot more highway accidents, and so we responded to that like a public health crisis, the way we would be if we didn't have a right-wing group blocking us on guns, which was to say, this has got to stop. So what did we do? We had these guys make cars that don't flip over as easily. Right. We got seat belts put in cars and required child-safe seats to make fewer children die in car accidents. When people go around like GM and they're making cars that blow up, we hold them accountable, which the gun industry passed an immunity bill through Congress in 2004 to make sure they're not held accountable. Right. People have to get personal liability insurance. Whereas when some people out there accidentally shoot people, we pick up the bill. They don't pick up the bill for that. We also we also, of course, have people take tests. You have to take a written test. You take a performance test to show you know what you're doing. We register cars. We license people so we can track them. These are all things. And then of course, there's the whole element of drunk driving, where we decided to actually declare a war of sorts on it. Now,
and
no
our freedom has never recovered from it. I mean,
exactly. Freedom was never the same in America.
Well, I know for us sort of socialists here on the Majority Report, that doesn't matter. But for real red-blooded Americans, they care about that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, look, we've all been stopped, I'm sure, at checkpoints before because there are random checkpoints. The equivalent, I would say, of a background check to make sure that people are not driving drunk and aren't going to hurt people. Bartenders that keep serving people that are wasted are held responsible. If they get in an accident, they're held responsible for cutting people off.
Maoism.
There's huge prison sentences for people who drunk drive. Right. Look at all of what we did, and you know what all of that accomplished, Michael? What all that accomplished is that traffic fatalities have been plummeting while gun deaths have been skyrocketing. And in 2015, it's predicted we'll have the first year where more people will die due to guns than due to cars.
Absolutely.
So you've got two opposite trends going on there. So bringing up automobiles is just dumb because obviously somebody can take an automobile out and kill people, but we've done everything possible in that instance. And if we think of new things, we'll do that to try to limit it. With knives, same thing. There are a lot of regulations when it comes to machetes and knives that are made really for killing. But, there are knives that are used for cutting your food. And clearly, again, it's a red herring because nobody can knife somebody from 100 feet away. People can't go up into a book depository or, if you will, a grassy knoll, depending on your beliefs, and kill a president of the United States with a knife. We're talking about something that is entirely different.
And it's also, in many cases, I mean, frankly, harder to get something like a switchblade than get a gun. I mean, that is the kind of astonishing, and the car example is the perfect example because you open up this conversation where first, as you're saying, it's a category difference because guns and cars are not the same thing, obviously, unless maybe some of these people use guns as like coffee coasters or something. I have no idea what goes on in some of these people's homes, but and then get to the before we. I think that there's two other points before we get to the people kill people argument. I mean,
right.
It sounds.
And
so
I also
ludicrous.
want to just make a quick point because which I didn't mention, which I do in this piece, where two incidents that I brought up. One of them, it's almost it sadly is almost perfectly comparable because on the same day as Newtown happened in Henan province in China, a crazed man walked into a classroom and started stabbing children. He stabbed 23 children. Every single one of them lived. Okay, while 26 people were killed at Newtown, including 20 little kids. And more recently in Pittsburgh, I believe it was in April or March or April, maybe February, a crazed kid walked into a school also with a knife. He stabbed 22 people. Every single one of them lived. So again, it's not to say that it's not terrible that anybody dies from a stabbing. My heart goes out to those three innocent people. They were killed were stabbed to death by this lunatic in Santa Barbara, the same way as all those who were shot. It's just to say that there's no comparison between what a gun can do and what a knife can do.
Of course. So people kill people. I mean, it sounds so fatuous and disingenuous in and of itself, but this does get kind of trotted out. I mean, isn't the obvious answer then? So people kill people, so therefore shouldn't we want to be aware of and monitor what the psychological and emotional state is of somebody who is acquiring a weapon of mass destruction or minimal or whatever.
Which is, I mean, call it whatever you want, but when you can mow down a movie theater the way that guy did in Aurora, that's a weapon of mass destruction.
That's absolutely a weapon of mass, of course.
And right, on a 110 or 100 bullet drum magazine, I mean, so yes, you hit the nail on the head with that one too. You've got people who can get this kind of weaponry, and the NRA says, well, it's not the weaponry, it's just the people who are using it. First of all, obviously, I don't accept that claim. That's bogus anyhow, because whoever that person is, if they're using something with 100 bullets versus something with 10 bullets, they can do a lot more damage. It is regulating guns. It is taking military-style weapons off the street. It is returning to a time pre the 1980s, which most people don't even know that in this country, when military weaponry was not available to almost anybody, and when concealed carry was something that existed in a couple states. It's this assumption that when you're talking about these people, well, people are human beings who have tempers and who do stupid things accidentally. And when they do those things in public, those of us who never signed up for their agenda get killed.
That's right.
And so there's that aspect to it. But okay, for a second, let's accept the NRA's tortured logic, right? That it's people who kill people. Well, if you do accept that, then why wouldn't you want to do background checks on those people?
Right.
Right? I mean, we're not doing a background check on the gun. We're doing a background check on the person. We're making sure they are mentally stable. We're making sure they are not a criminal. As I brought up earlier, if it's the person who we need to be held responsible, who needs to have accountability, not the gun, why wouldn't we make them get personal liability insurance and pay the price for their actions? I mean, these are just common sense things. Why would the NRA be against that? And the answer to that is it's just a slogan. It's a bunch of crap. They don't believe in that. It's a way of getting out of responsibility and doing exactly what we said, selling more guns. Because like tobacco and oil, it's a product. They make money off of it. End of story. Second Amendment, convenient excuse. And so that's what we're talking about here. They found something, in the Constitution that talked about states protecting themselves when we had no standing army with militias from both danger of revolt in the cases of the Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion, or being attacked by outside forces like the British, which has absolutely nothing to do with somebody having an assault weapon to walk down the streets of New York today.
Exactly
not
right.
related.
And finally, I just want to hit this before we wrap guns up because the final myth that you touched on, that again, it seems so obvious if you took just a few minutes to do a little bit of deductive reasoning, but you're going to hear this a lot too. California had tough gun laws. This still happened, because this is when the conversation flips. It goes from this will destroy our freedom. This is, then you have to ban knives and cars and blah, blah, blah. And then you have the kind of world weary, smug, cynical, disingenuous, like, oh, well, I mean, these gun controls don't even work anyways.
Right.
So
It doesn't work.
knock that out.
Which did you see the? I'll start with just if you saw the headline in the Onion,
Yeah,
which
yes.
was country says gun law that this can't be prevented in only country where this ever happens,
Right.
where this happens regularly.
That's right.
Here's the simple answer to that. We live in a country where you don't have to show a passport to go from state to state. We have these things called states. They have imaginary boundaries. You can drive across them. So, for example, if you've got California, which happens to be connected to Arizona. Arizona is a state that has the weakest gun. It's tied, I think, with Mississippi, or maybe just behind it for the weakest gun laws in the country. So Nevada also was a state where the state legislature recently passed a background check bill, and their governor, Brian Sandoval, their Republican governor, vetoed it.
Right.
So they don't have background checks there either, which is why I mentioned someone in the piece, John Patrick Bedell, who's the one who was arrested, who had a right-wing anti-government philosophy, who had been suffering from mental illness, tried to buy a gun in California. He'd been declared mentally unfit. California did it. The gun laws worked, and they flagged him. He couldn't get a gun. Drove across the border to Nevada, got his gun, no problem, no questions asked. Ended up at the Pentagon, started shooting people.
Right.
So there's that. The second part is when you say the California laws didn't work. This murderer there had 41 10-bullet magazines. And he, instead of having a 100-bullet magazine or hundreds, where he could have gotten many more bullets, much easier, and he didn't have an assault weapon. As terrible as this thing was, it could have actually been much worse. If California, which has among the best in the country, like New York and Massachusetts and others, were willing to go as far as every other civilized country goes, and do the common sense thing and do two things, which is require when someone wants to get a weapon that there are a couple referrals from family members and friends, that they're of sound mind, and conduct a psychological exam on them. Also at that time, then this guy never gets a gun. The Navy Yard shooter never gets a gun. The guy in Aurora never gets a gun. In Virginia Tech, where the guy had been declared mentally unfit, that record was never even shared, or he wouldn't have gotten a gun. You could have prevented it in all these cases. So what I would say to them is, it's not that California's gun laws didn't work in this case. They did. They made this less severe. They're just not tough enough, to be quite honest with you. We need to go further. And the final thing I'll say is you've got examples that are pretty simple to find around the world and even within the United States. Because the one state, the one perfect test case that is not connected to other states you can't just drive into is Hawaii, clearly.
Right.
And Hawaii has the toughest gun laws in the country. Okay, right. They have. They also have, they have. I guess they're one of the top three. They have the lowest gun ownership rate in the country, though. And magically, with those statistics, guess what else they have? The lowest gun violence rate in the country. Mm-hmm. So that's the example of Hawaii. You want to go beyond Hawaii, you can look at Japan, England, Canada, most Western European countries, and the rest. They don't come close to us. In 2010, the Children's Defense Fund released a study showing that a child or teenager in this country is 65 times more likely to be shot than a child in England. That's right. So somebody tell me how their gun laws don't work, because these are places that have passed comprehensive gun laws, and the best case of all, most recently, because people say, oh, we're a frontier country. Canada was a frontier country. Australia was a frontier country. Australia was headed down the same path as us, and they had the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, which was their new town, where somebody showed up in Port Arthur in Tasmania, a tourist site, with a number of assault weapons and killed something like 40 people and injured another 30 or so. And the conservative government there, run by John Howard, basically just said enough. and they passed a comprehensive gun bill that included a 30-day waiting period, registration, licensing, and time on the range if you want to get a pistol, banned concealed carry unless you can have a good, show a good reason for it, banned assault weapons and pump-action shotguns. So is there still gun ownership there? Absolutely. They still hunt there. You can still get, if you pass through the hoops that they have, you can still get a handgun. But they passed a whole series of measures because these all make common sense. And what you've seen is in 1996, when this occurred, in the 10 years leading up to that, they'd had 11 mass shootings. They were averaging over one a year. They have not had one since in the 18 years since. Not only have their shootings gone down by about 70%, but their suicides have too. Because the other dirty little secret is, in most ways, when people who are depressed go through a sudden weak moment and try to kill themselves, often it is a weak moment, and often they won't do it multiple times. And if they're using something else, pills, a knife, something else, most of the time, people end up surviving.
Right.
Whereas the vast majority of times, somebody puts a gun up to their head or in their mouth, as you'd expect, they don't survive. And so suicides have gone way down too. Again, it is a public health problem, like smoking, like drunk driving, like venereal disease, like many other things where if you sit there and you don't let ideology dictate it, but you use the best science and common sense you have available, you can eliminate most of the problem. This is no different.
Absolutely. And I think before we move to the next topic, I just think the bottom line is, and the reason that your work in this is so important, is that this needs to completely leave the realm of historical, constitutional, philosophical, cultural debate, and really just get anchored in there is a pernicious and dangerous industry that will cynically use anything at its disposal to guard and expand its profits, period. That's what drives this. That's why we don't have gun control, and that's it. Everything else is noise. And that's
exactly
line.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would just say, for people who think we can't do that, we absolutely can, because this isn't a constitutional issue.
No, it's not.
I mean, the simple fact of the matter is that even with Justice Scalia's right-wing ruling that, as Justice Stevens wrote in the Washington Post recently, a ruling that when he joined the Supreme Court in the 1970s, not one justice accepted that there was an individual right. The consensus of historians who studied the Revolutionary period don't accept that there was ever an individual right. This was a made-up farce by the NRA and adopted by right-wing judges. And again, Warren Burger, put on the court by Nixon, who was considered a rock-ribbed conservative, said that this was the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public.
Well, I mean,
ever.
Look, right-wing imagined history is a dangerous thing, and there's nothing more clear than that when it comes to guns.